Welcome back, everybody. I'm Tommy McCarthy, and this is Let's Talk Cyber. It's a pleasure today to welcome Tom Egglestone. He's going to tell us a little about what he does, who he is, where he's from. We've been working with Resilience now for some time, and happy to say that these guys are leaders in their field. Tom Egglestone, welcome, sir, to Let's Talk Cyber.
Thank you, Tommy. Yeah, really pleased to be here.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, Tom, and I believe you've been holding down the fort whilst the team have been off at Black Hat in Vegas, so somebody's got to stay and keep it going.
Absolutely, yeah. Black Hat and those kind of events are great, and it's a wonderful opportunity for the technical side of the business to get out there. But obviously being here on the claims side, on that front line for when things happen to our customers, we always need to be here.
For sure. And the interesting thing is, Tom, some of our listeners will be aware of the fact that we recently hosted a few CISO corporate dinners supported by yourself, Resilience, to share your insights around cyber risk and claims and the bigger picture about cyber risk, which a lot of people really didn't appreciate the complexity around, obviously, cyber risk. Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where have you come from? What brought you into this industry?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I always kind of start more recent and then I go back to earlier on because I didn't come into the industry in a typical way. So I've been doing cyber insurance now, always on the claims side. So supporting clients through these cyber incidents for the last 10 years or so. I've been with Resilience for 3 of those, where I'm the head of claims international, which means I'm responsible for the building, the delivery and the quality of the claim service across the UK and continental Europe. Prior to that, I've worked for other insurance companies like Hiscox, CFC Underwriting and Tokyo Marine Kiln. And actually prior to that, and this is where I can bring a bit of a unique perspective to the role and to the industry, is I actually spent several years in the psychology field. I spent time as a support worker. I worked on mental health support hotlines, suicide hotlines, and also spent some time volunteering on a secure ward as well. So really and the reason I bring that up is because it essentially means if you look at my career, I've always supported people through various types of crises and in difficult situations. So really, basically looking to bring that human-led and empathic way of managing these cyber incidents, combining that with technical expertise to support insureds when they have these incidents.
Tom, it's, sadly, mental health affects just about everybody in this current climate. There's so many challenges that we all face, and I can see the great skill set of being blended exceptionally well. 10 years cyber insurance, hard to believe, that the industry has been required in insurance for that level of time, because it's still quite a new, groundbreaking industry. There's so many things that are evolving at a rapid rate, some that we'll talk about just now. We're going to talk a little bit about ransomware, Tom, because obviously it still forms one of the biggest challenges that most organizations see. So given the fact that it's still the top cause of financial loss in cyber incidents, what have you noticed recently? What are the things that have really stuck out to you guys at Resilience recently?
Sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, ransomware is a completely pervasive threat, and it's continued to get more and more traction at all kind of levels. And I think that's evidenced by the fact we've seen the UK government actually recently undertaking a consultation. They've actually had the results back, and they've provided some initial comments on that about some measures they're looking to introduce to help manage the threat of ransomware to UK businesses. So it's clearly on the public agenda, the government's agenda, and there's good reason for that. The good news, and that obviously is quite a doom and gloom start, but the good thing that I've seen and that Resilience have seen, and I know that other experts in the field have seen, is that although ransomware is still there, it's still a threat. And when it impacts a company, it can still be very detrimental and cause a great deal of impact. What we have seen is that over the last 2, 3, and maybe even longer, last several years, we've seen the frequency at which actual ransom payments are being made has come down quite significantly, actually. And even now, if you look at public reporting like Coveware, who are a ransomware negotiation specialist, their most recent report puts it at around 26% of cases where they saw a ransom being paid. But if you go back to 2022, 21, that's up in like the 60s and 70s. So, and I think the reason for that is that we've really seen companies get better prepared, whether that's IR readiness, whether that's exercising their incident response plans. I think we're generally seeing a higher level of control in place and better cyber hygiene, and just a more awareness from more senior figures within companies. So we're seeing the board being aware, or seeing cyber risk as a board issue, not just a technical issue for the CISO to manage. So yeah, still pervasive, but the frequency at which we're seeing ransoms being paid is going down, which is excellent. I would say the other thing that I would point out is we've seen, the kind of the differences between exfiltration type incidents where the threat actor is taking the data out and then extorting the company versus encryption events, which are what it says on the tin. They're locking things down and then saying, well, if you want us to unlock everything, then you're going to have to pay us. So though the latter of those, the encryption comes with a lot of urgency and a lot of panic and a lot of impact, which gives a propensity to pay ransoms. But actually we're seeing, and what we've seen reported is that exfiltration type attacks, which leverage that panic of data being leaked, of your customers being aware that you've had a cyber attack, and all of the kind of panic and fear, uncertainty and doubt that comes with that is pervasive regardless of what kind of business you are. You don't want that kind of thing to happen and to have to explain that to your customers. So we're seeing actually the exfiltration attacks tend to lead to higher payment frequency.
Yeah, Tom, I think sorry for butting in there, but I think one of the interesting things is you made some reference to different timescales, 2021, how it's all increased. We're now here in 2025. And, transfer fraud schemes are still the biggest scheme that's catching people out. How can we change that, Tom? What can we do to change people's approach to getting caught out? I mean, what's going wrong here? What can we do?
It's so challenging, isn't it? Because the thing with transfer fraud is it takes advantage of human culpability. So it goes beyond technological controls and it just takes advantage of people's, maybe whether it's lack of awareness or what have you. But actually, these phishing campaigns that people are falling victim to are getting more and more advanced. And, I think we may well talk about AI, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at that point. But that's where AI starts to come into things. But I think if I think about let's think about what companies can do to try and mitigate the risk of, transfer fraud happening. So I think, first of all, it's about, preparedness. And we talk about that. You talk about practicing an IR plan, but I actually think, these kind of phishing trainings that you do are great. But I actually think, could we do more? Could they be more real life type scenarios where that you actually exercise, if you've got an accounts team, can you actually put them through a real life fraud scenario where they actually have to face that down? And I think, one of the other things is a lot of the time what we see the threat actors using in these transfer fraud scenarios is fear, urgency, saying we need to do this now, otherwise this deal is going to collapse. We need the money now. So I really need you to, and don't tell anyone because this deal it's very secret and it's going to go through really quickly. So I need your help. We actually saw that type of narrative being used on a case quite recently. And when it's coming from someone that the victim perceives to be like their CEO or whatever, it's really quite powerful. So what I think would be helpful is where technology can come in is like, are there ways that technology can be used to just slow everything down a little bit if money's moving around, whether that's prompts or warnings that this account doesn't match, or these records aren't the same as what we have for that person. So is there a way for tech to just help people take a breath when they're going through these kind of situations? And I think the other thing is, when I think about resilience is, we have seen some of these transfer fraud cases. And what we're trying to do is through our Resilience Operations Center, which is where we take learnings and new developments, vulnerabilities, claim events, we take those and try to take the learnings of what has happened to the unfortunate few, and how can we apply the learnings to help to inoculate the many, so the rest of our portfolio, and help, use those learnings. So that's something that we're doing a great deal of. And then I think the other thing is there's a culture thing. So I still think there's a bit of a blame culture. So I think if someone falls victim to a phishing attack, there's a lot of shame, and that will only play into the fraudster's hands. So I think there's a shift in culture that needs to come from the top of companies as well around this type of risk.
You're absolutely right, Tom. We're hearing that, the blame game, especially right across every industry. We're working very closely with public authorities, and, members of various public authorities are being caught out under that precious scheme. Obviously, being kind of told that this is legitimate, you've got to get it through, it's got to be done now. If you don't do it, you're going to be in big trouble. So there's a lot of people out there that just don't know where to turn and how to respond to these vicious malware attacks that happen. And I think through education with organizations like yourself, it can only improve. Now, you did say something there about AI. Obviously, the flavor of the year, to say, and the irony is that we work, as you know, with a variety of entities in the Middle East. And on that note, we've delighted to say that we've got a very senior CISO coming from a government ministry from the UAE to attend the same event you'll be supporting this year.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's
Talk
excellent.
just to talk about the challenges in AI. But Tom, when it comes to AI, what kind of impact are you seeing that AI is having, and why? Why is there so much success around cybercrime with the use of AI? What's going on?
Yeah, I think so. The one thing I would say is I remember, and I think this was at the start of last year, there were, everyone gets into prediction season. It's like, right, what are the big things that's going to happen in 2024? And I remember I saw at least two people or two companies projecting some kind of AI supercharged ransomware pandemic. And I can say, and I'm sure everyone will be pleased to say, we've not seen that. So we've not seen some kind of like superware that's been built by purely out of AI, or something that's or a campaign that's purely AI driven. I think the way that AI is being used by threat actor groups or what have you is the same as how you and I would use it, or how people are using it. It's taking basic tasks off of your desk so that you can spend time focusing on the stuff that matters. So for threat actor groups, maybe pushing coding activities through AI, which allows them to free up time to devise new stuff. And I think it's more about lowering the barrier to entry for threat actors. And I saw there was so CrowdStrike released a report fairly recently, and their investigations indicated that phishing emails that had been generated by AI, after they'd kind of assessed it, probably with an AI tool, to be honest.
Yeah.
But after they'd assessed it, they found that the success rate for phishing emails that had been devised by AI was significantly higher, like 10 to 20% higher, I think. So I think that's a sign, and that's in keeping with how society at large is using particularly large language models like ChatGPT and things like that. So I think it's generating more convincing phishing emails. It's streamlining their operations. But I think the thing to highlight here is, yeah, that's all problematic, but also AI is being used capably by defenders to kind of spot anomalies and identify trends, and to respond more quickly to compromises or cyber attacks as well. So I do think it's both sides are using it. It's just whether it's keeping the good guys ahead of the bad guys is the challenge, of course.
Yeah, and the feedback I'm getting right now from industry leaders is that, unfortunately, the bad guys have got the slighter upper hand. From most quarters, people are saying the same thing, that, yeah, the bad guys have got a slight advantage because they don't have the same limits and the same restrictions on resource, apart from anything else. Yeah. I guess the final point I want to touch on, Tom, because this is always going to be a short and sharp one today,
of course,
is about the supply chain. And interestingly, at your recent CISO roundtables, your guest speaker, the Right Honourable Stephen McPartland, focused heavily on the impact that supply chain has. Obviously, when it comes to the vulnerabilities that are being delivered to the broader enterprise industries, and we're seeing that now, especially involving vendors in the supply chain. We've got to look at Marks and Spencer's, for instance, and a lot of the big major high street brands that we know. What can executives do about, or what should they be thinking about when it comes to risk in the ecosystem that they can't take control of? So obviously, there's a limit to what the executives of these big organizations can do to guarantee that their supply chain are not bringing the threats and vulnerabilities that they're being exposed to. So what are the kind of things that you would advise the executives to be thinking about when it comes to the supply chain?
Yeah, and Stephen McPartland was quite right to highlight this, because ultimately supply chain, as far as we can see it's probably the largest but least visible attack surface that companies are facing, right? So it's completely outside their own borders, and it's a really challenging risk to mitigate. You can't really control it. You're quite right, Tommy. Like, you can't control your supply chain's risk. So what can you do? Well, I think there's a bit of a shift in mindset from control to visibility. It's step one is, okay, having a very clear view of what is our vendor ecosystem. And it's not just who are our vendors, but it's like, who are their vendors? And how does that all impact our business? And what impact might X vendor being implicated or that system going down have? And that's something that I think absolutely should be encouraged to be undertaken as part of incident response planning. So it's almost like taking business continuity planning, which many businesses have always done for fires or, natural risks. So it's almost, can you extend that to cyber risk as well? I think it's about looking at, and I kind of mentioned this, prioritizing impact on your business versus like which vendors you spend the most money with, which one is the one that's going to impact you the worst if it goes down. And I think that's reflected if you look at, we saw two in the last couple of years, we've seen, I'll compare two supply chain attacks. You had CrowdStrike, globally recognized. Everyone knows who CrowdStrike is. They're on F1 cars, huge company, had an outage, impacted a lot of people and caused some financial loss, but maybe not as much as some people thought. But then we also saw some claims come out of a software called CDK, which is used by the auto dealership industry, particularly in the US and Canada. And that had a very small impact in terms of global recognition. But on those companies, it had massive detrimental impacts, and it really rendered them completely unable to do anything. So it's that difficulty of, you got the big vendors, but also what about these small vendors that provide a very specific service to a very specific industry? It can be a real point of aggregation. So I think there's prioritizing impact. And this is something that Resilience is working on. We're developing products to assist clients with this. It's about having dynamic, ongoing monitoring. So a tick box exercise at the point you enter into a contract with a vendor is not sufficient. You need to have a dynamic, ongoing view of the risk that's presenting. And that's something that Resilience is, we're hoping to launch some interesting products on this in the near future. And then, as we've kind of talked about, it comes back to the board. So just making sure that cyber risk, supply chain risk, and cyber risk more broadly is a board level discussion. So it's not just for the CISO or the head of IT. It's for the CFO, the risk manager, CEO. It should all be being discussed at that board level.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right, Tom. Gone are the days of just putting all the blame and all the responsibility at the door of the CISO. I mean, lots of organizations are actually going out of business due to various different impacts on supply chain hacks, malware attacks. So you're absolutely right. It's got to be a boardroom. It's got to be right on the boardroom agenda, I think. Tom, that we've touched on some great pointers here that certainly add value to what we can expect to understand more about ransomware. We're naturally going to keep in contact with Resilience. We're working with you guys dynamically to make sure that all of our listeners are kept up to speed with what's going on in your space. Tom Egglestone from Resilience. All that leaves for me to say is thank you so much for joining me on Let's Talk Cyber.
Thank you so much for having me, Tommy. It's been a pleasure.